Humanitarian and Compassionate Application Workshop. Obviously, you guys know that. And I'm really honored and excited to have Deepa and Yasmin here presenting today from the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic. So I'm going to let them get started. I'm going to introduce them first. I think there'll be kind of a general presentation that I believe can be fairly interactive, so feel free to ask questions throughout. And then in about an hour and a half, we're going to have a little break, and then we're going to do some case studies and really put into practice what we've learned. So this is Deepa Mattu. She's the Director of Legal Services at the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic. She's a passionate defender of women's rights to safety, access to justice, and self-determination. Deepa is an alumna of Leader of Change program from Maitri Foundation and a recipient of the Spirit of Barbara Schleifer Award. She has over 19 years of experience in providing legal services, public education advocacy, and not-for-profit governance. Deepa has been involved with various issues related to migrant rights and gender violence globally. She's worked on multiple projects related to forced marriages and so-called honor-based violence and has become a resident expert on family violence issues. Yasmin Abuzgaya is a Toronto-based lawyer who practices immigration and family law. You know I'm not from Toronto because I say Toronto. She works as a staff lawyer at the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic and regularly provides advice and representation to women who have experienced gender-based violence. Yasmin graduated from McMaster University with a degree in English literature prior to attending law school at the University of Western Michigan. She completed her licensing requirements as a student at law with the Barbara Schleifer Clinic and was called to the Ontario Bar in June 2018. So welcome you two, and thank you so much for being here. Take it away.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. I'll bring the clicker here. So we will start with briefly about the clinic and then go into the presentation. The flower diagram that you see right now in front of you is kind of describes what the clinic does and who we are, pretty on point. I'll come back to this diagram. Let me go to the next slide and I'll be bringing you back to this. So who we are a specialized legal clinic. We are located in the downtown of Toronto, Ontario, which is like the downtown of Ontario. What do? We provide legal advice. We also have interpretation services. We have counseling services. So the services of the clinic are pretty wraparound. The clinic has been in existence for over 30 years. The two resources that we are actually referring to today are both available on the clinic's website. The clinic's website is right here. Hopefully we'll be able to give you copies of the deck as well. If you already haven't received it, it will get circulated so that you have all the information that you need. So, clinic believes in a few things. So I thought that would be really important for us to share with you so that we can kind of keep those things in mind in terms of the context that we are working from today and the context with which we'll be having a conversation with you today. What do we believe? That we believe that violence against women means any act of violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering. It includes financial and structural violence, and it also includes spiritual violence. These are really big words. We will unpack them as we go today. We also see violence against women as acts of threat, coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. One thing I think which you might hear us say again and again, and some of you who attended the seminar yesterday, that violence against women happens in all cultures, it's a global pandemic, and I think, again, you'll hear that quite a few times throughout the presentation. Respectful relationships and positive social change are possible when women and men work towards them together. And each woman who comes to the clinic and each woman who contributes to the clinic is participating in that change. So that's our belief statement. What's our value statement? Our value statement are based on these big, broad 5 principles: feminism and anti-oppression, compassion and self-awareness, a reflective awareness of power, community and connection, and autonomy and self-determination. And what does that all mean? That means that we work from a client-centric perspective. We believe that women should have a choice to make a decision in every aspect of their life, whether it's their legal case or a choice of their profession or choice to survive violence, leave violence. So all of that should be from a feminist and anti-oppression framework. So that's the framework we'll be talking from today, all day. So taking you back to the flower slide that I promised I will, if you look at the core of the blue flower, the three words there are women, underserved, experience of violence. So that's the core of our services. We are not a legal aid service, we are a service which is beyond legal aid. So what does that mean? That a woman who can actually qualify for legal aid service in Ontario, we will make sure she gets that legal aid certificate. We won't take her case on. We would work with women who are underserved, that means they don't have any government funding available for their case, and they cannot afford a lawyer. We practice in the area of immigration, family, criminal injuries, and some criminal law. So our gambit of services that we are offering them is actually growing. We recently got a project for employment law and sexual assault as well. So we are trying to incorporate, as the things are arising, so with the Me Too movement, we have seen a 84% increase in the clients who are accessing our legal services for independent legal advice on sexual assault. So we decided that we needed to actually offer workers' rights and employment law services. So that's why this new project we are working on. So all of those underserved population is where our services are, and it's for women. The understanding of who qualifies as women has evolved at the clinic. So we actually serve non-binary people as well. We are trying to work on a trans-inclusive policy. It's in works. So the clinic, as you can see, also evolves and changes with what the change in the population we are serving is happening. We also do a lot of work around policy and law reform. You will probably hear Schlaffer Clinic in media a lot. What are we trying to gain from all these legal services, language interpretation, policy, and law reform? So the purple flower, which is on the top, is basically telling you about the outcomes. So we are trying to find stability for women. We're trying to find connections for them. We're trying to help them gain their agency. We're trying that they actually know about their rights, and we are trying that they actually find their speech. So the idea is not to make them do something that we think is right to do. The idea is to empower them to take decisions for themselves. Any questions about this? No? Okay. I'll be probably asking you any questions about this after every few slides, because I feel that the interactive sessions are usually the better ones. So what will we cover today? We'll cover violence against women and what that entails. We'll cover trauma-informed approach. We'll talk briefly about race and precarious immigration status. We'll talk about agency application. That's the main core of the presentation today. Fact is an issue. We'll talk about Kanthasamy versus Canada, the Supreme Court case where clinic had intervened. We have a couple of case studies, and then we have some immigration status as a barrier, some considerations that you should be thinking about, a comparison between the refugee claims and agency application, that decision making, which I think all of us grapple with for people who are already here, trauma-informed approach to agency, and some evidence gathering. The Q&A is at the last, but I would encourage all of you to actually ask us questions all along, as Julie said at the beginning. So disclaimer, as you all can appreciate, that because the law is all constantly changing, our presentation also constantly changes. We have two resources, as I said, on our website, and we have these disclaimers in that a few times as well. Okay, over to Yasmin.
Okay, so we wanted to get to know your location a little bit more, since we're not from the area, and we wanted to do that by opening the floor up to a little bit of preliminary discussion. It would be great if some of you would volunteer to answer some of these questions for us. Give us your names, tell us about what are some issues you have with agency applications, what type of applications you see other than agencies, and what are the challenges your clients face when accessing services?
So my name is Julie, Halifax Refugee. Something that you had said, Deepa, in terms of the trauma-informed, client-centered approach and the empowerment to make decisions comes up for me in applications, but especially humanitarian compassionate applications, and it has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with trauma, with gender-based violence, and with evidence gathering, and that's kind of, as a practitioner, how far to go to collect evidence, to draft people's statements with them, and yeah, there's always, given that agency applications can be so huge, sometimes people will come and bring me every letter, get their own psych reports, everything like that. But more often than not, people bring me some sort of letter of support of one paragraph, and I will talk to that person, I'll interview that person, I'll basically make a statement for that person to get them to sign off on it. And most of the time when I have the time, I'm happy to do so, but that's something that always comes up for me in humanitarian compassion applications, and I think it relates a lot to trauma and empowerment, like you were saying, and people's reluctance to actually ask people themselves or extract the information from their supporters or their families themselves. Anyway, so that's one of the issues for me. I don't know if anyone has any.
We'll definitely touch on that.
We will touch on that during our evidence gathering portion of the presentation.
But it is a challenge. I want to acknowledge that we go through that challenge on a routine basis. I have a term called reverse engineering for that, because you sometimes are doing that, right? Like you're doing, this is what I think it should be.
Yeah.
But how can that be?
Yeah, and that's
right?
really kind of empowerment, and that's where it
and that's where the reconciling of the two becomes
Yeah.
really difficult if you're a trauma-informed lawyer.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely talk about that.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Jillian. I also work at the Halifax Refugee Clinic on the settlement side. A big challenge that we find, and it's really difficult, especially for single moms doing agency applications, would be the lack of any underlying immigration status in a lot of cases when people are doing agencies, and being further pushed to the fringes in terms of access to services. So I don't know if you're going to touch on that. But
Absolutely. Anyone else? No? Okay, so we'll just keep these discussion points in mind as we go along, and maybe things will come up. All right. Here's a bit of background info on the sort of framework that we're going to be approaching this training workshop from. So, violence against women, this is a lovely quote that we have up here. Violence against women is a citizenship issue that fundamentally affects a woman's bodily integrity and personhood, as well as her right to dignity, security, and freedom from discrimination. As domestic violence is slowly becoming a recognized issue in our mainstream society, there remains many changes which need to be addressed by legislation and courts regarding domestic violence victims. And here's the training framework.
The trauma-informed approach in the time of constant legal change is definitely something that we all kind of grapple with as practitioners on a day-to-day basis, thinking, how do I actually remain trauma-informed when we are under-resourced, unfortunately a lot of us, we have high case volumes, a lot of clients to work with, and the trust building, which we all know is the crux of the matter in a trauma-informed practice. How do you actually build that trust, get all that information, do that evidence gathering, and still make sure that it remains, from her perspective, it remains from her space of having agency in making those decisions. So the approach that we have been taking at the clinic is we have structured ourselves in two different spaces. So one space is where we call it an assessment stage, and that assessment stage is not necessarily with a lawyer. The assessment stage is with a counselor. And sometimes if you don't have an in-house counselor, what we are recommending is that try to work with a professional who can provide that support. So work with a support person who can be working with her at that assessment stage of things. And that's where your interview techniques would shift a little bit, because you want to make an assessment of, is she ready to be interviewed by you for all the information that you need for your file? And if you, in your assessment, understand she's not ready, your interview technique needs to change, and you need to bring in a professional, or you need to bring in a support person who can actually support in her interview and can support her in telling her story, or a narration of some kind of her own experience in her own words. Why do we say that it's important to have narration of her story in her own words? Because that would keep it authentic to her experience, A. B, it will also help you with that trust building exercise that you want to do. So slowing down, taking a pause, which is really difficult in the work we do, is really intentional at our side of things. And we use our assessment side of our clinic to do that work for us. So we collaborate with our assessment workers. They are the ones who do that tough work for us, and we get the file once that assessment is already complete. So our interview techniques are that we keep the interviews short. We don't make it long. Our first few meetings will not necessarily be diving deep into her case file right away. There are these warm meetings where we are just trying to establish a rapport. If she needs an interpreter, which most of our clients do, we would have that interpreter on site available. There are those instances where the language is so hard to find that we'll have an interpreter who will be available on the phone and not in person. But we see the change in the experience when you don't have interpreter in person available. So we try to do it as much as possible in person. The impact of that changed interview technique on her memory and the way she's telling her story has been huge for us. We have seen the difference, the way her memory works, if you have given her that time at the front end. If she has got someone to work with and tell her story to someone else, which you have received, now you have a better assessment of her file, you'll see her memory works differently. So previous to this experience of the structure, what we saw is that a lot of times she would tell us the whole story, and the next day she'll come and she'll have another thing that she missed out, and the next day she'll come and she'll have another thing that she has missed out. And then as lawyers, we are as we are trained, and rightly so we are trained to be very ethical about our fact finding, we get this instinctive feeling about, is she telling a lie? Or is she surviving? Is she manipulating me? Like all of those gambit of emotions that we experience. And I'm not saying that any of those emotions are wrong on our part, because at the end of the day, we are practitioners, we are trained in a certain way. But I think trauma-informed practice tells us that it's actually she who's surviving. She's surviving her trauma, and this gap in the information is not manipulation. It's not that anger that we see. It's not that frustration that we see on her part. It's the trauma. So she is traumatized, and she's surviving her violence, and her interaction with you is also part of that survivorship. So she's on a continuum. And once you have that realization that she's on a continuum of survivorship, and that's why her story changes, or her memory is impacted in a way that, it's like it's somewhere in the brain here, and as she sleeps at night, something comes to her. She's like, oh, I missed that. I didn't say that. And then she comes back to you running and says, I actually didn't tell you this, and you're like, what do I do with this information? So understanding her memory, so that's the reverse engineering. We utilize that technique in our memory work with her. So we will tell her, if you remember anything which we think we are anticipating should be there, if you remember anything about this aspect, please come back and tell me. We always leave her with that feeling that you might need to come back to us, and it is okay to come back to us. So that relationship has created trust with the clients, which we earlier used to feel was not happening, because we were not necessarily actively engaging with them and saying, we know that there might be some things that you might miss out. You might miss out because someone in the community has told you, don't talk about that. Don't talk about that you are using a false name. Don't talk about that your paperwork on XYZ is not correct, right? Like they have been advised from community members, they've been advised from some agent, they have been advised from someone they met abroad, they have read something online, right? So they are they are advocates for themselves already. So I talk to, I do this training with a lot of lawyers. So I say that instead of feeling frustrated about it, celebrate the fact that she is good. She's doing well. She's advocating for herself. So I remember when me and Yasmin were working as, at that time Yasmin was working as a student with us a few years back. So yeah, we had a client together, we had a file, and that woman kept on, changing the story. So Yasmin was really frustrated one day, and she's like, I don't understand. She comes and she gives me this new story, and I could anticipate where this was going. And I'm like, I know where this would land. So I was like very calm about it. And she's like, how come you're not feeling so frustrated? And I'm like, she's surviving. She's surviving with you and me in the room. But there are other people in the room for her, which we can't see. So that understanding that she has those other people in the room when she's talking to you, she has other voices that she's listening to, is a very important thing to remember in your practice. And then being reflective. I think that's a big piece. So that conversation that me and Yasmin would have about that client, the debriefing that we do, or that conversation we do at a water cooler, and get, the rant we do, value that. Give yourself license for ranting. What has been happening to us is we have been told that as if that process is not valuable. We haven't put dollar sign to those feelings that come up. I think that those feelings are really, really valuable, and they actually are helping you deepen your practice. So value those debriefing movements, value that discussion, value that rant. Tell yourself that that's part of my practice. That's making me a better lawyer, because you are processing all that's arising for you. Unfortunately, we have been told that's, you should be not feeling all those feelings as a lawyer. You should not be you're a lawyer, you're under, things are under control all the time. And something that I'll add, which is not part of the presentation, something I'll add, if we don't do that, if we don't be reflective and we don't give ourselves that time to kind of, just look outside the window and ponder over what's happening in this file, we will cope in other ways. So if some of our colleagues drink a lot, or if our colleagues have, a way of just, every night I need to go to, take 2 glasses of scotch down before I go to bed, that's what it would do. You will cope some way. And I'm not saying drinking is bad, I drink too, but thinking about what else would you do to cope? You would cope by doing something. Some people see that they become cynical about it. Some people would basically think the whole world is wrong, right? So we all have different manifestation of that vicarious trauma that we carry because we do work with traumatized clients. So thinking about that, if I do reflective practice and I give myself that routine of, letting me frustrated when we need to, and reflecting on what's arising for me. Why am I feeling so bad about it? Why am I feeling frustrated if say she is lying? Point is that she's not, she's surviving. But even if she is, why is it making me upset? So giving yourself that moment is really important. So if you don't, start putting dollar value on it. Start considering that's part of your file work. So that's 5 minutes, quick, cheat sheet way of knowing what trauma-informed lawyering and practice can be. This is me? Okay, so we divided the slides, and Yasmin is keeping track of, which is what is me. So maybe for this slide, I'll ask you, when you look at this slide, how do you feel? What's arising for you when you're looking at this?
Right to me.
Right to you? Okay, that's amazing. That means you get this.
You were talking about the different voices in the room and the different kind of advice that's in the room with a woman as she's also talking to you, and you can see that there are all these things in the room as well.
Yeah, that's true. Anything else? Anyone from this side of the room? What is arising for you when you're looking at it?
How complicated it is.
How complicated it is. Thank you. I wanted to hear that because it's overwhelming. It's like so many things, right?
So, all underlying factors that may affect the way
Absolutely.
how you're lawyering, representing, and understanding and interpreting, and so it's kind of multidisciplinary lawyering or representation involving all these aspects,
Of her life and who she is, and you know.
who she is and how you understand and how you interpret and how you translate
Mhm.
every interview
Mhm.
and body language.
Mhm. So true. So
So
true.
there are all underlying factors that may affect your client or
Mhm.
whoever it is.
Absolutely.
I think there are perhaps as practitioners some of these things that we can see or understand in a file and some that we don't see at all and some that
Mhm.
she sees
Mhm.
but some she doesn't see.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, please.
I noticed that immigration controls and distress of police is in the colored banner. Does that mean that it's
No,
more significant?
No. It's the placement of the diagram. There's no meaning to that. Anything else? No? Yes, please.
I think probably that there's an infinite number of circles also that could go beyond these ones that are listed that we don't even think about or that are coming up and coming more into public consciousness like as time goes on.
Absolutely.
I think about the complexity of all this and then navigating these complexities and working with the clients requires so much time, but the nature of the work is often time poor.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we work in a way that addresses, the other people in the room when you're against the clock as well?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the biggest challenge, right? Like, how do we slow down in the processing? How do we give ourselves that time that we're talking about? Because being under-resourced and with high volumes also creates a DNA of trauma in our work, which as practitioners sometimes we don't have the privilege to reflect on it, right? That what is this really doing to the way we are practicing? And I think that's the big piece, that this crowding or this overwhelming picture, which on a screen like this, it's looking so big and there's so many things. That overwhelm is actually reflected in our practice as well. And for the people who work from the social justice clinic perspective, I can tell you, like, the pressures are immense, right? When I am at a funders meeting and then I'm running to a client meeting, everything I did at that funders meeting feels like so useless suddenly. It's like, I was like, that was such a wastage of 3 hours. I wish I could have spent all those 3 hours with this client instead. So, and then the multiple roles that we play, and people who do this work from their private practices, the pressure of keeping the lights on, paying your bills, right? You want to do good work, but you have bills to pay. So that balance act is also part of all of this in this. But one point that I think is really important to remember is that we need to build that slowing down in a way that it is intentional. And remembering this can help us that. If we remember that there will be another day, I will not be able to finish this. Even if I stay all night today, I am a human being at the end of the day. There are too many problems to be solved. I cannot solve everything in one day. And I have other people that I can collaborate with and work with and bringing those people in. So that bringing those people in piece is really important. And then also trusting your trusted intermediaries. Like the people who are you going to work as your intermediaries, you have to build a trust relationship with them and trust in their capacity. So I understand your clinic works with a lot of pro bono lawyers, a lot of people who are, so building that circle of trust and giving everyone a similar framework to work from is really important. So at the clinic, what we are doing is we don't have any capacity to do criminal law, and we see a lot of criminalization, including crimmigration. So that's what we are doing. We're just building that circle of trust, increasing it, and giving everyone the training tools that we have, the capacity that we have, so that that trust can be bigger and bigger. Another point that I wanted to make with this slide is that we don't usually understand gender-based violence from this framework. Usually the framework that we are given is that there is a normative role for the genders, and that normative roles see an imbalance. That's when the violence is happening. So one person has more control over the other, and that's what is causing the violence, which is true at the basic theory level. But the clients who we are working with, in case of our file work, like the immigration and the refugee file work, this is also a huge part of it. So the systemic factors, the racism and xenophobia, the heterosexism and transphobia, the cultural stereotyping, shame, classism, all of these factors actually do play a role as well, and also cause the overwhelm in the clients' lives. So I think some of the things that we need to remember is that a woman's experience of violence is on a continuum. She's not necessarily only experiencing intimate partner violence. She's also experiencing all these things, but she could also be the same client who also has experienced child sexual abuse. She could be the same client who has also experienced some form of trafficking. She could be the same person who has experienced economic coercion and her employment conditions are not good. So that whole gambit of different things that arise for her on a continuum are important for our narrations as well, but sometimes we lose perspective on because we have a case to present. So we sometimes look at her situation as, what form of violence have you experienced? So instead of that tunnel vision, looking at the continuum can also help in your advocacy with your files. And we'll talk about that more when we get to the evidence gathering.